Well, hello, everybody, and it's time again to extend an invitation to my friend and colleague Jenny Lynn. We had a marvelous conversation last time, and I wanted to just quiz her a little more on some of the things that she's recently been saying on Raelan's channel. So, Jenny, thank you for agreeing to chat with me again. And I hear your career has been supercharged since that interview. So
I'd say it's been resurrected, a bit like not quite 3 days, but it's been resurrected really.
marvelous, marvelous. Well, not surprisingly, I have to say that interview I watched was so amazing. I mean, it raised so many questions,
Mm.
and I know that Raylene was asking you a few things, and that she was reflecting back her kind of understanding. But as a therapist to a therapist, I had some more, perhaps a deeper dive, perhaps into some of these questions. So I really wanted
Yeah.
to ask you a few things. So, without further ado, I'd like to ask you. You mentioned that clients often have problems setting boundaries. Now, I found that as well,
Mm.
um, and that, in your opinion, that's linked to feeling unworthy. But just simply telling someone that, well, you are worthy. You are worthy because you deserve good things. It doesn't necessarily hit home, does it? How can you instill that in a person who has had years of that belief?
Yeah, I mean it's a tricky one that because there's so many different ways of going into that. So for example, words are cheap. We can use words and they don't mean any difference, which is some some of the times why things like talk therapy doesn't get us anywhere
Hmm.
because they're just words. And unless you're in the space to really receive the words, they don't really work. Which is a good question that you've asked there because yeah, therapists watching, how do you reach your clients? How do you get them into that state of worthiness? How do you get them to see that they're worthy? Um, which is why I use hypnotherapy, which goes into the very core of the people. Now, you're a hypnotherapist as well, aren't you?
I
Yeah.
am, yes, by
Yeah.
training. Yes, that's
Yeah.
my PhD actually is in clinical hypnotherapy. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
I don't advertise myself as a hypnotherapist anymore. I sort of see it as part of my tool set. But yeah,
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So hypnotherapy does reach the places other therapies don't reach. But then even within the spectrum of hypnotherapy, there's a huge diverse range of approaches within hypnotherapy. So one of the most, and there's another element to it as well, which I'll go into in a moment, but one of the most effective ways of getting people to feel more worthy is to get them to visit their inner child in hypnotherapy and for them to realize that that child is just a kid, whatever baggage they've carried from that traumatic event wasn't really theirs to carry. It was handed to them by a parent or somebody else. So once they're back in that struggle, when they see the child within them, they start to see that they're more worthy than they thought they were. It's just they've been carrying baggage that doesn't belong to them. And this goes on intrapsychically. It's not a mental process. This is like, oh gosh, yeah, I remember feeling like that. I am that child. I remember that child. Oh my God, that's exactly how I feel now. That poor kid. Let me put my arms around her, him. Let me put my arms around this child and tell her that she's wonderful. You know. Clients often come out of that, not always, but often come out of that with a great sense of peace. And it's the process of collecting all of those stray bits that have gone into hiding, the traumatic bits, bring them home. I think I've mentioned this before, but you're bringing those stray bits back to you. All of that, I'm not good enough because you were carrying that on behalf of somebody else. Yeah.
Good
It's
point.
not it's not true. It's a lie. So, like you bring that little part home. Yes, you are good enough. I'm ugly. No, you're not. You're carrying that on behalf of somebody else. You're beautiful. Regardless what you look like, you're beautiful. So the process then is an unfolding of bringing all those bits home. And that's what really makes up subsequent sessions is how do I capture these bits and bring them back to me? Um,
Mm.
I would also say the other bit I wanted to add just a moment ago when I mentioned is that we have to work with our hearts because, working with your head is cheap. Yeah. Anyone can analyze somebody else and think they know them. Yeah. But when you work heart to heart, you are connecting at a very primal level, a very deep level. And your client feels held when you work with your heart. When you work with your head, they feel judged and maneuvered and manipulated. Yeah. But if you work with their heart, your heart, they can feel you. They feel the holding. So, I mean, how do you do that? I think as a therapist, this is what I've spent most of my career doing for my colleagues is teaching them how to be truly authentic in a therapy room, how to be real, to be a real person. Um, so many of my supervisees over the years have come to me, initially at least, and said, "Oh, I didn't want to say that to my client in case I upset her." And I'm thinking, well, then you're not being real, are you? Then you're not being honest.
Mm.
And if you can't say that to your client, how many other people can't say that to her? Yeah, or him.
Mm.
So you are censoring yourself before you've even got into the therapy room because your judgment of how you should be in the world is I should be perfect too, which is why a lot of therapists find it really hard to accept they're still living a life. Like we like to, hang ourselves up in a cupboard at night time and put them away, but it's still us. So I think
Mm.
we have to model that embracing of ourselves. We have to model our authenticity. That doesn't mean that we're rude to clients because we've observed something, but that if I were that client and I wanted to hear a truth about me, how would I want to hear it? I would want somebody to be kind,
Oh, yes.
even if they're telling me a truth that is difficult to hear.
Yes. Mm.
So I think there's technique, there's heart-centered work, authenticity of the client, and then there's that holding space to let the client explore their vulnerability that they've packed away and carried on behalf of somebody else all their lives. And it's giving that back to whoever the perpetrator was, and whether there was, a perpetrator in the broadest sense,
Mm.
and realizing that actually you're all right, really,
Mm.
in your heart of hearts.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Oh,
So what resonated with you there? What do you
oh,
want to
so
do?
much. I love inner child work. I think it's one of the ways of getting past the thinking into the feeling, because most people, if they can't see themselves as a child, they can see the vulnerability of being a child. And if they can't quite connect with their child, I say, imagine you had, if they've got children themselves, I'll say, imagine you had your child in front of you and they just told you what you've told me. That usually shifts. Sometimes it's possible to, even if they haven't got children, just allow the notion of vulnerability to permeate so that they can really connect with that, because all their life, as you said, they've been carrying this feeling on behalf of, well, it's a protection, isn't it, against feeling in some ways.
Mm.
um, and now what you're doing is you're kind of lifting the veil on that and saying, this is a child we're talking about, you know. They shouldn't have to manage this and cope with this and hold this. This isn't what childhood should be. It often, it doesn't work out that way, but when there's been a failure of connection, you talked about perpetrators, and what we're saying here, there is a wounding, and whoever perhaps created the wounding is the person that we're holding it in kind of protection against, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the inner child connection is really key, I think. And I love the idea of vulnerability and heart-centeredness, because what what that reminded me of was, this happened really for me this week, was I made a mistake. I booked a client in. I put the appointment in correctly, but then I said in my communication to her, "I'll see you tomorrow," which just happened to be a Sunday. And of course, I don't know why I said that, because it wasn't the right day. And poor woman, she thought, oh, that's unusual, but okay, and turned up. And luckily, I mean, I was able to say, oh, it's a mistake. I'm so sorry. I'm obviously fallible. I'm human. And I think actually that was, although it was a bit embarrassing at the time when we did meet, it was a wonderful bridge because now here I am. I'm not perfect.
Mm.
I've made an error. I'm not
Yeah.
going to pretend anything about that other than it was just me, my brain doing something rather strange. And I gave her a gift as well in kind of recompense, and but it was a heartfelt gift. It was like, would you like this? Because I'd just like you to have it.
Yeah.
And it's been a wonderful thawing, if you like, of that professional
Yes.
barrier.
Yeah.
I mean, one does need a boundary,
Yeah.
but I think it can be more porous than we've been taught. And I love the fact that you raise that issue, that we
Yeah.
are, when we're heart-centered, we don't need to sit behind this kind of professional gauze and
Mm.
pretend that we've never felt anything. And
Mm.
I think there's the ability as well to do more, little bit of sharing of experience. I don't know if you do that, but
Definitely. Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
much more. I don't want to take up someone's time with my story, but I will interject if I think, yeah, I had that experience, and this is what I learned from it, because I just think that propels people.
Yeah. And
So
what's more is it removes their isolation because,
mm,
people turn up into therapy and they feel weird,
mm,
bad. There's no one in the world quite as bad as they are. Do you
correct.
know what I mean? And then you say, well, actually, I remember this happened to me and that's how I felt. And they go,
Mm,
oh my God, it's not just me, So I think self-disclosure is a real important tool.
mm,
That's not to say like, oh, you think you've got problems, listen to me. It's not one of those, but
no.
just snippets of self-disclosure are really, really healing, I think.
Yeah, I've used it a few times. At first, I was really nervous of that, but and I've seen that response in the client,
Yeah.
the recognition that they're validated,
Yeah, yeah.
and the echo, as you say, oh, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one who has felt that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And the model of counselling we used was not Rogerian. I mean, we'd studied Rogerian years ago, but there was another one. I can't even remember the name of it now. But there was another model of
mm,
counselling, which was far more responsive than the Rogerian style, which is very, oh, that must have been hard for you. How did that feel?
yeah,
That kind of like wall of,
mm,
I think Rogers wanted to show unconditional positive regard. That was his
mm,
issue. He wanted that. But in doing so, he kind of wasn't really very real. He wasn't really very present. Whereas this model that we used, and I don't remember the name of it, I'm just looking on the bookshelf there, no, can't see anything. One of the skills within that set, and there were about 20 of them, was self-disclosure.
mm,
Because self-disclosure is really therapeutic for people who feel they're odd or weird and there's no one like them and they're lost.
mm,
And it's always good for them. I mean, one client years ago, I shared with her about my schizophrenia when I was 23. And she said, I can't remember who it was now, but it was definitely a woman because she said, oh my God, Jenny, you're the most sane person in the world. I said, yeah, well, I might be now, but I wasn't then. Um,
yes, it's wonderful for them to see your vulnerability as well as a human being, isn't it?
yeah.
Um, and I think it encourages, yeah, trust as well. I do feel that.
Mhm.
Um, so okay, so you touched on the idea that um, talking about something doesn't necessarily eradicate it. All right, so and that this heart-centered holding um, enables people to get in touch with their feelings, doesn't it? Much more, and then what do you think the magic is in that? If they can get in touch with what they felt at the time, as opposed to the walling off that people do to
Yeah.
protect themselves. What's the benefit of being able to connect with feelings in the presence of that holding?
I think, in a way, it's Winnicot. Can't remember his first name, but whatever it was, Winnicott. He talked
Mhm.
about reparenting,
Yeah.
and that part of therapy is about being the parent your clients never had.
Mm.
And so, in that holding, you're giving them permission to be everything they want to be, whereas their parent was saying, no, you have to be like this, and then I'll love you. So I think it's unspoken. Obviously, I'm not saying, oh, by the way, I'm doing some Winnicott holding now. But do you know what I mean? The holding um, enables them to relax and explore without judgment and with acceptance, knowing that everything they say or experience is perfectly okay in the setting that we're in.
Yeah.
Um, and that I will hold them and I won't drop them and I won't impose limits or
Mm.
anything on them. They're free to explore. And
Mm.
I think, that's when the magic happens, really. It's when they know they're safe
Ah,
within that setting. Okay.
yeah. Safety.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Back to safety, which may not have ever been experienced with perhaps their family.
yeah.
Um,
Or it was very conditional.
or it was conditional, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll give you safety when you achieve or when you're good or
Yeah.
whatever it was that the parent approved of.
Yeah.
And we're, as you said, unconditionally holding that person. And that's a real skill, isn't it? You've mentored other practitioners. So can you teach it? Or is it something you just
I,
have or don't?
I tell you what, the most successful times I've ever taught it has been when I've run my training for chronic fatigue. This is going back, I finished it in 2009, so I haven't done a training since, but I did write a book about it. But the most successful time I've triggered other people to feel like that, my colleagues, is when they've come on the courses and we've done some group work. I might have demonstrated in front of the class with one person. Um, and they are watching, they've witnessed not only the people, sat around watching, but the client that I'm working with or the therapist that I'm working with. And um, there was one group I had, I can't remember where it was now, but oh, it was in Manchester, that was right. I ran a course in Manchester and I had one group there. There were two or three, four people on that course, very few people. But one of them, he witnessed the process of another guy, and that other guy had a massive awakening because I was holding the space, I was showing them how to do it, blah, blah, blah. So he had a massive awakening, but this guy watching suddenly developed Reiki hands. I know this sounds bizarre. He was very heady, he was a professional in his other life, not just a therapist. And his hands suddenly got hot and he realized that when he's with people, he can feel them with his hands. And suddenly that channel, that love or whatever was coming up or coming down, whichever way it was coming out in his hands. And he suddenly had this ability literally to hold people with the power of his hands. And that was just him witnessing what I was doing with somebody else. And I think, because it's behind closed doors, often it's just me and the client. Nobody gets to witness that process. But when you work in a group
Mm.
and they're all watching and witnessing, there was one point when I turned away from the client I was working with to look at the rest of the group, and they were all crying their eyes out. And I just thought, wow, that's going deep there. It's like they're having therapy too. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
vicariously.
yeah,
I think if you can be traumatized that way, you can certainly be healed that way, by witnessing others' process.
yes,
Yeah, it's
good
beautiful, really
observations. Yeah,
beautiful. I love the Reiki hands thing. I get that doing yoga, and
right.
I don't know why. And it doesn't happen right at the beginning. It happens usually about midway through after I've done certain postures, and then bang, I've suddenly got hot hands and that pulsing that I get in the middle. I think it's to do with light energy, actually. I think that's what's happening because the bioenergetics of the human body is that light is emanated primarily through the hands. and fingertips and center of the hand. So I think there's a sort of energetic shift, as you say, coming up, maybe from the heart, who knows.
Yeah.
How wonderful, how amazing. And
It is amazing thing because the thing is, they're watching,
mm,
but I'm not telling them how to do it. They're
no,
just witnessing it.
they're witnessing the process. It could also be that heart to heart connection in the room. You're in resonance, you're in synchrony,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, because we know that the heart sort of field is 9 to 12 feet, isn't it? So, and if you're all gathered around watching something, you're in that coherent state. I'm sure there's an entrainment going on there as well, where the heart rhythms start to entrain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
but yeah,
And a lot of those people that I trained, I think I trained about 70 odd people over a number of years. But a lot of them came as my supervisees after that because they were, although they're fully qualified, and strictly speaking, they didn't need it as much. But um, I think that they just enjoyed that way of working. They realized they could work more effectively and more efficiently if they used their heart. Now, the one reason some people don't go there as therapists is because they're still wounded. And that's not to say I'm not, I've healed all my wounds. I haven't. But if you're still unaware of some of your wounding, it's very hard to work with your heart because it feels like your client's going to drag you into your own lack of safety, your own repressed stuff that you haven't really addressed. And that's when a therapist will say, oh, let's rescue the situation quickly. Let's bring this client back. We can't have that. Oh, and then, you get all this kind of really unhealthy codependency from the therapist, which is really bizarre.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
because
trying to stop their anger or end their sadness or whatever. And actually, that's exactly what they need to feel and not be turned away from.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And sit with the uncomfortable feelings because,
Mm,
they're not, my feelings aren't caused by you.
indeed.
They're coming from my side.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's an illusion to think that if I stop you crying right now, you'll feel better. No, you won't. I'll feel better if I calm you down. I won't feel better if I carry on and just, run with this really bad feeling I've got inside me. I don't feel good enough. I'm not a good enough therapist, all that stuff that goes on around our
Mm,
own evaluation of what we're worth in a therapy room.
mm, mm.
So yeah, I forgot I've lost my train of thought now, but anyway.
Well, we were just saying we were starting with how it could be taught
Yeah.
and this whole idea of making sure as practitioners we are grounded in our own, safe space, but we're also aware of our own vulnerability, and being willing to co-create with the client. I use
Mm.
that phrase deliberately because I think you're in a process that neither people are fully in control of. I don't believe. I believe it unfolds, like you said, it unfolds as a dialogue because of this heart connection. And I certainly don't know what the end result's going to be. I only know where I'm going to begin. And so it's humble to begin that dance with someone, to sort of hold them and wait and see what unpacks.
Yeah.
But I think you touched on a very important point that this brain, particularly if you're very cerebral, which
Mm.
many people who are drawn to therapy are,
Mm.
I mean practitioners,
Mm.
um, when I was training in hypnotherapy, my tutor uh, blatantly said, um, crying is not helpful. So if your client is crying, you need to shut that down.
No.
And I remember putting my hand up because I very rarely interject, but I said, I disagree. He was like, why? And I said, I think it's a very important process for people to come through their emotion to the other side and to be held in that. So I think there's a lot of bad training out there. I don't want to point fingers, but you
Yeah.
know. It's very cerebral in many cases, and people study the theory and then obviously go out into the world and are using it, but without that fully realized self.
Mm.
You
Mm.
know, you have to be fully realized. That doesn't mean you have to be fully healed, or I don't know any of us are fully healed, but
No.
we do belong in our bodies. You know, I have a body, I'm aware of my body, I'm aware of my body posture, how I'm looking at someone,
Mm.
um you know, how I'm feeling in this moment, and trying to make it as non-judgmental and as peaceful, I think is a word I would use.
Yeah.
Peaceful, even if I'm hearing really terrible things, which often we do, don't we?
Yeah, we do hear some pretty awful stuff. I
Yeah.
remember going back as well, listen, talking about trainers.
Mm.
I'm going to name names because I
Oh,
didn't train under him. But Paul McKenna, I watched
yes.
him, oh, it must have been 15, 20 years ago. It was a long time ago. And he was doing, in fact, it was when I had a TV and I haven't had a television for 10 years.
Mm.
So um, I was watching him working with somebody, and this somebody, because he does this really fast, you'll be back in the room, that sort of thing. I watched this woman that he was working with get really sad and emotional, and I watched him go and rescue her and stop her and
Mm.
close her down. And I remember thinking, how's that going to help? For goodness sakes, how
Mm.
how does that help? Were you
Mm.
doing it for the cameras, or is that how you do it? Because to me, it just felt counterintuitive,
Mm.
you know. But I suppose if he's working in that flashy, get well quick type way,
Yeah.
without really looking at the reasons why. y-
Well, I mean, that is the style of that kind of intervention. Is it's all about the skill of the practitioner, isn't it? And kind of the result as well. It's very left brain, actually.
It
Don't know
is.
if I said that before in our one of our talks, but that
Mm.
left right distinction I think is really important. Left brain seeks the result as quickly as possible. Right brain is looking more at process and curiosity around what's going on. But left brain wants to fix it. So
Yeah.
so, and I think a lot of practitioners do get caught on that. You know, I myself, I want to get a result for somebody. Um, but sometimes I just have to let go and let the process take over and see where we end up, because sometimes it can be so different to where you thought you were going to go with that person.
Mm.
I don't know
Mm.
if you've had that experience, but you kind of have an idea of what the session is going to look like, and then it's completely different. Um,
Yeah, probably not so much. Well, probably not for some time. I'm just trying to
mm,
think now. I might have done years ago, I think, possibly. Because I've been teaching this heart-centered way for, it's got to be 20 years. I've been teaching it.
yeah,
So, I can't teach what I don't practice, so I have to practice it. It is what I do.
yeah.
Um, there are times when I'm just trying to think out loud about the people that I've seen when um, you hope that inner child work will actually rescue the inner child and they'll all be better. And it doesn't quite work that way.
Mm,
They can't make a connection to their inner child,
mm.
or they're so disgusted with themselves, you can't get them there.
Oh, the
So,
disgust is big, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And then sometimes I just have to work completely abstractly. We're not going to work with any versions of yourself in the past or the future. We're just going to work on the body. And
mm,
I have to change tack. But again, it's kind of like I'm still like what you just said, I'm still running with my client because, I can't fit them into my box just because my box is square. You know, theirs might be oblong or round. And, they're not going to fit into my square box. So I have to soften the edges and sort of find another way of working with them.
that's the flexibility
Yeah.
of approach that I think really brings rewards.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not a common experience actually in therapy. A lot of people have their tool, whatever it is, and you have to work within the bounds of that
Yeah.
to truly be able to go in any direction.
Yeah.
From, you know, doing energy work, sometimes I have to go very metaphorical
Yes.
with a client, because they aren't using language. They're using pictures. They're using sensations.
Yeah.
You know, and so that I guess is the strength of what you do, is that you can pick up any kind of any tangent to what's going on and find a way forward.
Yes, yes. In
Mm.
particular, if they can't locate an inner child or a future self or whatever, and it's all a bit messy, I say, "What are you feeling?" And they'll say, "Oh, I'm feeling this, that, and the other." Okay, if it had a shape or a color, what would it look like?
Mm.
And then we go into sort of a kind of a parts approach
Mm.
where, it looks like I've had people with hoovers on their chest and tractors and stones and all sorts, it looks like this, it looks like that.
Yeah.
And you say, well, what would it, if it could speak, what would it say? And
Yeah.
you say,
Yeah.
I hate you. What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And, so you have to work. And I found even in the last, like, since my career has suddenly exploded after 25 years, um, you know, even now, like, I'll sit here and I think, I have no idea what we're going to do now, but let's just, and I say this to my clients, look, I don't know what's going to happen next, but let's try this.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll just pick up anything they've given me and
Yep.
say, tell me more about that. And
Mm.
I'll let them explain a little bit more about that. Okay, tell me a little bit more. What is it you haven't yet said about that? And once they've given me the full picture of what that is, I might say, what does it look like? And they're not even in hypnosis at this stage. I might say, if it had a character, what would it look like?
Mm.
And they'll describe it to me as a gremlin or something or other. And then I say, well, what would you say to it? And they'd say, fuck off,
Mm.
I hate you,
Mm.
go away.
Mm.
And but the job is not to get them to get rid of it, but to integrate it
Exactly.
because it's been sat in their consciousness, sabotaging them,
Mm.
thinking it's protecting them
Mm.
on
Mm.
some level. But
Mm.
actually, once it's witnessed and seen in the abstract, and there's some kind of relationship that you can develop with it, then you can sort of bring it home and say, it's okay, it's okay. You
Yeah.
can come home now. So,
Yeah. Bringing it home. I love that phrase because it is all about reintegrating all the split off parts. I mean, I don't particularly do part work, but I understand how that works, and that little children inside us at whatever age we were when we had the initiating experience can
mm,
get very stuck at that age,
mm,
as you say, sabotaging the person and preventing them really from evolving into an adult. They're actually stuck as this series of little you know
people, yeah.
children and teenagers.
Yeah.
So how
Mm.
how can we encourage people to find an adult response in different challenging experiences that they're going through?
Good question. I'm going to have to think about that. How do we encourage them to be the adult more?
Yeah.
Um, well, one is obviously I send out to most of my clients an assertiveness and confidence course, which reminds me I have to send one out. But I send this out, and it was something I recorded many years ago. It was given to me as a course from my tutor 25 years ago.
Uh-huh.
He said, take it and just use it, see what you want to do with it. So I did. I used it for a number of years, and then eventually I condensed it down from 10 weeks to 4, and
Yeah.
I took all of the most important lessons out. Um, and have you come across Eric Burns?
Yes.
So you know the parent adult child model.
Yes, I do.
Yes. Okay. Um, so so on the one hand, how do you encourage people to be the adult? On the one hand, you get them to integrate the child and realize that they're okay.
Mm.
What this tends to do, it tends to take down those very powerful figures around them a peg or two.
Mm.
So the very aggressive mother or the very neglectful father, it tends to take them off their pedestal a little bit.
Mm.
And it tends to empower you a little bit. So that whole process of the inner child work.
Mm.
But then, if
Mm.
they haven't got the voice or the tools, they still need to learn how to speak their truth. Yeah. So that's where I do a lot of cognitive work then. So then I sort of move into the cognitive and
Mm.
we start looking at the tools. How do you do it?
Mm.
How do you defend yourself appropriately? How do you communicate your needs in an adult way? How do you receive somebody else's rage or criticism without feeling bad? How do you do that? Yeah, you have to be quite firm with your boundaries because your boundaries come from your self-love. If I have a child that I love to bits, like my daughter, am I just going to stand back and watch somebody punch her in the stomach? Of course I'm not. I'm going to stand between her and that person and say, Who do you think you are? Yeah. And
Mm,
that's exactly what's happening to my clients and myself. You know, when we retrieve that vulnerable child, we suddenly realize they're really valuable.
mm,
No one's going to treat me like they used to. I'm not
mm,
having it anymore.
mm,
There comes a certain commitment and determination for that.
mm,
But then you have to learn how to speak. Yeah. So you might regress by going back into old ways of being, but if you learn the tools, the cognitive tools, how do you get your needs met, or how do you defend yourself appropriately without going into a rage, without stepping back and feeling vulnerable? How do you do it? So then it becomes all about language.
mm,
And this is when cognitive processes, I think, work, is if you understand the why, then you can use a very important cognitive approach. But if you don't understand the why, cognitive approaches are just like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You know, you're going down,
mm.
basically.
Going down with the ship. Yeah, yeah.
You
But
know,
what I was thinking there, I think there is a use for language, and I think, how we talk to ourselves, and how we phrase things to ourselves is key to how we feel about ourselves, actually. That it is a loop. It's not just um we feel bad, therefore we say bad things. I think it reverses as well, and the habits we have of talking to ourselves in judgment creates that feedback that says you're worthless. One of the things I do to interrupt that, as and this might seem a bit odd, but because it's not particularly top down, but is I get them to stand rather than sit, and we stand up, and then I get them to stand in a certain way, which is usually hands on hips, and then I say, and now say what you just told me, standing like this, and it totally shifts not only obviously how they feel, and therefore how they put those words over, but the relationship between us is very different then, because they're more in the ascendant.
lovely.
And that's called the power pose, and it's got really great research. It was developed by a lady called Amy Cuddy. She worked at Stanford, and she found that the neurological feedback particularly for women who don't stand their ground, or don't tend to as much as men. I exclude sensitive men from that, but just standing in a different way. I
Mm.
teach it a lot to my teenage clients as well, because a lot of the girls in particular are very sort of like,
Slouchy.
full of shame, and I can't speak up, and I say, how does it feel being down there? And
Mm.
and then we do this, and they say, wow, that feel very, very different. So it also has a bit of humor, I think, and a bit of a laugh in that. It can be very formal in some ways, can't it, when you're working with someone, and it just breaks the state beautifully.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I
That
think
sounds like an amazing tool. That's really,
it's
really good.
yeah, I do it. It has to be used sparingly, but I think with people who are very deeply in shame, just teaching them how to stand, how to take up space, how to own their truth, and then the words that come out are somehow different,
Mm.
because people's experience of life comes from their inner beliefs, doesn't it? And you just get in that feedback. What you believe about yourself is what you receive, and so then that reinforces the belief, I'm worthless, or nobody loves me, or everyone that I've ever loved betrays me, whatever it is. And so kind of changing the way you put things across, even if you're not 100% fully, in it, you're still trying it out. If you're standing in a way that shows that you have self belief, I
Mm.
think it comes across differently, and I think they get different responses then, and then that breaks that feedback loop that people abuse them or misunderstand them, or
Mm.
and I'm working on that myself. I have to say, it's not that I've solved that one. And I regularly practice this. I'm like, if I feel a bit low or down, I'm just like, okay, get into the power pose. Okay,
Interesting.
now what do I feel? And it's an instant shift. It's very
Mm.
powerful.
It's
Um,
amazing. I remember a colleague of mine who came on my very first ever chronic fatigue course. he was a chiropractor from the south, and he said to me that what he did with clients was something similar. He'd say, "Hold your head up, hold your head up,
Mm.
or put your shoulders back. How are you feeling now?"
Yeah,
And
similar.
they would say, "Oh yeah, I feel a bit different."
Mm.
And
Yeah,
he did that routinely. But I mean, I've never used it, but it sounds like an amazing, like you say, the power pose to get yourself in that
it just changes your state
energy.
internally. There's a lot of feedback, obviously, from your body into your back brain, vaguely, of course. But I just find these tools can be they can really accelerate someone's kind of changing their view of themselves, because
Mm,
the way we hold ourselves often is a reflection of our inner dialogue, isn't it?
mm,
Um, and I'll tell a story. When I first went into healing, and this was 20 years ago, and I think I used to carry myself a bit like this. And I don't know if I've told you this story, but I went to see a physical therapist. He was a massage therapist, actually, but he was quite a integrative one. He did acupuncture as well, and whatever. Anyway, so I went into his consulting room like this. He looked at me and he said, yes, well, you have a head forward posture. And I was like, do I? What does that mean? I've no idea what that means. Head forward. What's that? And he said, we see that a lot in clients who are anticipating bad things.
ah, interesting.
You're shrinking.
Yeah.
And so he did say to me, now try standing like this and like moving like this. And at the time I remember thinking, oh my God, this guy's really weird. because I didn't understand any of the theory, and I really had just gone to have a massage, so but it so makes sense to me now that our bodies read out the mind, the unconscious mind process. And so all the physical ailments and diseases that we get are just a readout of what's going on under the hood, as it were. So yeah, I just think working cognitively, working with the body,
Yeah.
making sure that connection is in place, I think all of those things are so profound.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it seems to me that you've got such a wealth of experience. How would you say we're going to move forward now in what's kind of coming down the pipe, as it were,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
for this heart-centered work? And this is my final question. So
Yeah, yeah, don't worry. Are you talking about where we're all going or where therapy's going? What,
therapy, specifically therapy, although you can broaden that to however you
yeah,
want. But that was
yeah.
my question.
Well, I think it's horses for courses. Some people respond to the cognitive approach and some people don't.
Mm.
But I think where we're moving to in the world, forget the whole New World Order and sort of AI stuff. The rest of us are moving into our truer selves, our more real and authentic selves, because we know that's where we belong.
Mm.
We don't belong in the glitzy world of AI and, um, social credit scores and that's not our world. We don't live there. So I think more and more of us are moving into our own authenticity with ourselves. And I think, there will be a divide. I think there'll be those that just stay on the superficial because that's all they can do. And there'll be knock-on effects from that. And that then there's those of us that are working so much in that heart space, in our sort of sense of authenticity, that we sweep people into our wake. Like people they want to be more real. They're fed up with plastic. They're
Mm.
fed up with the inauthenticity and the not knowing and the lack of purpose and not having a mission, not understanding what they're about. But they're fed up with it. They're absolutely, hacked off with it all.
Mm.
Um, but for every one person that comes through that grows and finds their true self and becomes more authentic, that's probably another 100 over the course of their lives. So I think the time is right, I think, for us as heart-centered therapists to really be attracting more and more people who are looking for the real.
Mm.
They're looking for the authentic. They're fed up with lip service, tablets, quick fixes. They're fed up with that.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
not to say what we do cannot be quick, but the quick fixes aren't interested in your soul and in your relationship with yourself. They just get rid of the symptoms.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's my feeling. I think our time is here
Mm.
more so than it's ever been in some ways. 25 years ago when I went into practice and I started working this way quite quickly, it took me a couple of years to get up to speed, but I began to work like this quite quickly. I was scared of um, declaring the S word, the spiritual word. I was scared of defining that for people because all people could hear was, oh, no, like that's all they could hear. But,
Mm.
I don't know, I can't remember who it was now, but somebody asked me what I meant by spiritual. Oh, it was one of my clients, I remember now.
Mm.
And I said, it just means to be at home in yourself. It means to know who you are, your place in the world, your power, your beauty, your ability to manifest whatever it is you need in your life. That's spiritual, just being true to you. And you know, I think that's the most important aspect of spirituality. Never mind God, never mind all these transcendental experiences. They're all part of it. But really, if you want to live your spirituality on a daily basis, you need to be real, authentic. That's what I think. What do you think?
I think it's a really interesting time because we've got this advent of AI, which is supposed to liberate us all from tedium, and create, meaningful jobs instead, which actually that remains to be seen. I think liberating people is all very well, but often it's the most vulnerable that end up being liberated first, and they don't feel it as liberation because then they haven't got the skills necessarily to go into other arenas. And but I think the question at the moment is coming up is, what does it mean to be human? Because we're seeing this alternative, which is just automatic running an algorithm. And spirit really is what defines for me the difference, that kind of we're more than our bodies, we're more than our minds. We have this vital force that runs through us that is connected to everything that we're embedded in, the field that we're embedded in. And AI is not going to have that, whether it manages to reproduce itself. I read that today, that the first AI that's reproduced itself. It's like, well, yeah, but it's only reproducing what it is, which is an algorithm. And someone also said to me, oh, it's going to replace your job. And I said, no, I don't think so. Because, yeah, you could have somebody to sit in front of a client and nod and go, that's interesting, tell me more. Yeah, you could get an AI bot to do that.
Yeah.
But to do what we do requires real intuitive sense of where the client is, what is it they're not telling you, as much as what they're telling you, and to kind of go with your intuition. And I haven't yet kind of found anything approaching that in the world of AI. So there's the other thing that I think is coming along is this idea of decentralized medicine. And decentralization is a term that we've kind of borrowed from finance, where people are starting to get rid of the bank as the middleman and start investing in interesting ways. But in terms of decentralized medicine, what it means basically is you stop engaging with the system that keeps you sick. And this is very controversial, and I'm not going to say, I always adhere to that. If I had a broken leg, I certainly will go into centralized medicine and get it fixed. But there is this idea of taking back control of your own destiny, if you like, your own bodily process, and finding out what it is, whatever you're experiencing is trying to teach you. And there are so many tools out there now, very basic tools, light, getting appropriate light, getting good sleep, getting good quality water. Oh, the whole science around the quality of water, which we've been ignoring, and we've seen this chronic disease level rising. So for me, it's all about learning to heal ourselves at some level with appropriate help. And basically, we need a complete paradigm shift in the health systems. So I'm hoping that is on its way, and certainly that's where I'm at, is to kind of promote more of that understanding, so people know that they're not as vulnerable, or not, that isn't the right word. They're not a victim.
Yeah.
They can take back certain level of control and start to shift things, and actually, there's a momentum towards that. I really feel that, because we've gone so far down the other route and it's only made us sicker.
Yeah, yeah. I
So
mean, there is no, for all the gold star medicine that they allegedly think that we're going into, and what with this back, you can have a vaccine within, a tailor-made vaccine within a week or whatever.
mm,
Oh my goodness, just don't even go there. Don't even go there. What the hell is that? You
mm,
know, what you need to do is get true, get real, like you say, come into your power, take responsibility for your health and well-being.
mm,
Stop outsourcing it to people that are just fiddling around with deck chairs on the Titanic. They're not really getting to the root of anything. They're just
mm,
masking all the symptoms. So,
mm.
my philosophy is, you probably can just about see my medicine chest there in the mirror.
Oh yes,
Do you see it there?
yes, I can. Yes.
Um, but that's all of my homegrown herbs, dried herbs, tinctures,
Yeah.
um, everything.
Yeah.
Diatomaceous earth, borax, everything is all up there. All the powders
Mm,
and stuff like that. And that's because I heal myself. I don't bother with the doctor. I haven't been to a doctor for about 20 years. It's been,
mm,
well, maybe 15, but it's been a long time.
yeah. Well, that's perhaps the subject of another conversation. I can feel another one coming on. But for now, I think we need to probably draw to a close. But yeah, fantastic. Good to hear a positive, ending to this conversation, that there are things you can do. And certainly I'll include in the description, ways to get in touch with both of us, and
Yeah. Yeah.
people can, yeah, take that first step. Don't be afraid. There's so much out there that you can do to heal yourself. So thank you so much, Jenny, as ever, for imparting your wealth of knowledge, which is considerable. You can really feel the authenticity of that.
Oh. No,
And
it's lovely. It's a pleasure to talk, and thank you for inviting me
you're
back.
very welcome.
So
And let's
lovely.
hope this is just the beginning
Yeah, see
of a
where it goes.
long-term, collaboration. So, all right. Well, I'll say goodbye for now, and thank you so much, and take care.
Yes, and to you.